Good evening, everyone. It's so great to be here with all of you. On behalf of my co-chairman, Brad Keywell and Mayor Rahm Emanuel, I want to welcome you to the third night of Chicago Ideas Week. Tonight is about entrepreneurship, a subject close to my heart. But what does an entrepreneur mean? The formal definition, the pursuit of opportunity without regard to resources currently controlled. Pursuing opportunity even if you have limited resources. An entrepreneur is what we call those who can't imagine doing anything else with their lives but creating. Creating businesses, creating social enterprises, creating change. Somebody who actively seeks out problems and then creates solutions where before there were none. Before I introduce you to tonight's host, I want to take a minute and tell you two of my own stories that tie together themes we'll be diving into tonight. In my case, as the case of so many others this evening, these are stories of extraordinary failure followed by iteration, building, testing, rebuilding, 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 and eventual success. I've decided to pick two periods in time as opposed to two stories that highlight the lowest and highest moments in my career. And oddly, these stories exist 10 years apart. The first was, it's the summer of 2001. Brad and I had started a company called Brandon Apparel Group. We were manufacturing children's clothes, and the business had grown rapidly. And by the end of 1999, unfortunately for us, we had taken on so much debt to grow that the business was actually failing. It was my first experience with failure. And as that business was failing, we decided to pivot and try to figure out something else to do. And so we started another company called Starbelly. We basically sought out the internet, decided to go start our first technology company, which was in the promotional product space, and we launched that business. And so we now had one business that was failing and another that was taking off. We wrote a business plan in March of 1999, and in maybe December of that year, about 10 months later, that company was sold for, at the time, a crazy amount of money, I think $240 million, which was an absurd amount for a company that was only 10 months old. And then we went to work for the company that acquired us. So as we got into the summer of 2001, the problem is that that company began to have huge issues, and it found itself failing. So now here I was in that summer. The first business we had started had gone under, and the bank was coming after us for the money that we had borrowed to build it up. Our second business, Starbelly, which was supposed to be this huge success, had also failed. And I went from, at the time, being worth nothing to being worth about $70 million to being worth nothing, all within a matter of months. And the third company also failed, and it was public, and so when public companies fail, you often find yourself in the middle of a bunch of lawsuits. People were knocking on my door late at night with subpoenas and lawsuits. I found myself in court, and I was literally meeting with lawyers days away from going bankrupt because I couldn't possibly pay all these people that were coming after me. And that was the summer of 2001. The second story is the summer of 2011. And I'll talk about the transition in between in a moment. But after that summer, I had started another company called Inner Workings in September of 2001, and that business grew pretty fast. And it went from maybe 3 million to 10 million, and then 20, and then 40, and on and on. And eventually that company went public in 2006. Then Brad and I started another company together called Echo in 2005, and that business grew even faster, and we took it public in 2009. We started a third company called Media Bank, which grew and became fantastic. We didn't take it public, but it's actually in many ways bigger than the other two. And then in 2007, this guy, Andrew Mason, who had been working for me at Inner Workings, had this idea for a company called The Point, which eventually became Groupon. And by the summer of 2011, I found myself with two public companies, a third that was bigger than the first two, and now we had all this excitement and energy over Groupon, which grew in those couple of years to be at crazy rates. It went from, we launched our first deal in November of 2008. We'll celebrate our 5th birthday here in about a month. And then we launched our second city, Boston, in March. And then we launched New York in May. And from there, we launched almost 1,000 cities in 48 countries within about 2 years. And so by that summer of 2011, we started to get calls from people like Yahoo and Google that wanted to acquire the company. And the valuations just kept rising by the day. You know, 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion, 4 billion, 5 billion. And so here I was in the summer of 2011, 10 years after I was filling out paperwork to go bankrupt with these 2 public companies and a 3rd private company called Mediaocean, and now Groupon was this massive success. So the question is, what happened between those 2 events? What's the secret formula that I found, that kind of magical formula that occurred between June of 2001 and September of 2001? Because in June of 2001, everything was collapsing, and in September of 2001, we had started Inner Workings, which eventually went public. And what's the magic that turned things around? The great entrepreneurial insight that all of you should take away this evening, because ultimately that's what I'd love to convey. The problem is, the answer is nothing. There was absolutely no magic. There was nothing that occurred except I left an entire career that was in collapse on a Friday when I left Halo, who was the company that I was working for. And on Monday, I went to work in a small office that Brad and I had, and I just started pounding away. I had no idea what was next. I just started working. I tried one thing, and then another, and then another, and then another, and eventually one of those things became Inner Workings. But I'm not alone. Our country is defined by the people who have pursued opportunity, despite limited resources, despite huge risks. And the risk of being an entrepreneur is enormous. 3 out of every 4 venture capital-backed companies will ultimately end in failure. Every entrepreneur experiences failure. It'll be a theme you hear about tonight over and over again. But the great ones, the ones whose efforts shape our society, are defined how they respond to that failure. The great ones treat failure as an inevitable step along their path, as a necessary part of their journey. You see, for the great ones, there's no win or lose. Rather, it's always win or learn. And in that spirit of tonight's session, which is presented by Ernst & Young, is called Entrepreneurship Fueling Performance. It features some of the country's most fascinating entrepreneurs who you're going to meet tonight, and they'll share with you how they did it and how they're doing it every day and what lessons they're learning along the way.